Gospel today comes from the Gospel of Mark, where we read, When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. And one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came and, when he saw Jesus, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I'll be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. Let us pray. O Lord, may your words only be spoken and your words only heard, and we ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Please be seated. Hello, Allison. So good to see you this morning. And Bo. Some 25 years ago, I read an article. It was 1990, and it surprised me that I still remember it. But this article made such an impact on me that it's stuck with me ever since then. It was in Forbes magazine, and it was entitled, "Why Grade A Executives Often Get an F in Parenting." Why grade A executives often get an F in parenting. And the article went on to say that some of the most high-powered, successful people often have the most trouble raising kids. In fact, they have trouble than any other more trouble than any other demographic except the very poor. And the article cited a host of statistics that bore this out. For instance, the children of high-powered executives, 36% of them end up in treatment for addictions, whereas only 15% of the general population has similar problems. And then the article went on to talk about why this might be the case, and of course it makes a lot of sense. A lot of the things that make for a successful business person, a successful executive, a successful professional are the things that make for an unsuccessful parent. The intensity and single-mindedness of a professional isn't what's needed in the life of a parent. The impatience of the business world isn't what's needed in a home. The necessity to lock things down and control them runs counter to what's healthy for raising kids. The focus on results, again, it just raises the stress levels instead of reducing them. And so the article looked at the various characteristics that can make people so successful and looked at the way those characteristics often run counter to what's needed in a home. And the simple truth is those characteristics that make a person so successful in business often run counter to what's needed in a marriage. I don't know that super successful professionals and executives fare much better in their marriages. The same things that are needed are in a friend. The same things that make a person successful run counter to the same things that are needed in a friendship. And so this morning, rather than looking sort of at the executive school of relationships, rather than looking at the business school of relationships, I want to look at the Jesus school of relationships. And frankly, this is one of the reasons I love Jesus. This is one of the reasons I have followed Jesus for as long as I have. One of the reasons is I believe he's God, but beyond that is also the fact that when I want to live a relationally rich life, and no one has been more helpful to me in doing that than Jesus Christ. When I look at how he lived his life, when I look at the things that he did, the things that he taught, the principles that mattered to him, and when I apply those principles, they make for a relationally rich life. And so this morning I want to use this gospel just to reflect a little bit on three principles that Jesus teaches, three principles from the school of Jesus on what makes a relationally rich life. There's more, but we're just going to focus on these three. The first one is simply that Jesus is willing to go off task. To be successful in the business world, to be successful at so many things, in school and in sports and so many things, we need to be able to stay on task, right? And that's really one of the most important things of all things, is just to focus in on the task and stay on that task and pursue it with single-mindedness and great intensity. But in relationships, what really matters is the ability to go off task and simply enjoy the people around us. And so in today's gospel, Jesus is on task. He's got places to go, things to do, people to meet. And we can imagine that Jesus is keenly aware that he only has a certain amount of time to get all things done that he wants to get done. So we can imagine that his time is very important to him. And yet, while he's going to the next place where he needs to be, he gets interrupted. Somebody comes right up in the middle of things. This is unscheduled. This is unplanned. This is an interruption. And yet Jesus is willing to go off task to make space to care about this person that's there with him. And then when he's dealing with this interrupted, he gets interrupted again. So he's interrupted and being interrupted. And while he deals with this interruption, the first interruption sort of goes to heck in a handbasket, and the help that the guy wanted for his dying daughter looks like it's too late because the daughter dies while he's tending. So Jesus keeps going further and further off task, sort of riding this wave as he makes the people that are in front of him what's most important. And ultimately, he trusts it'll work out, and ultimately it does. And it works out for the best of the relationships. So it's this ability to go off task that runs so counter to our nature, that is so helpful with our children, in our marriages, with our friends, heck, even in our church. One of the ways that we can go off task is simply by being silly. And that might sound a little strange. I don't know how many of you have seen a movie called Inside Out. It's a fantastic little movie, and it's actually a fairly sophisticated presentation of the best of what we know in modern neuroscience right at the moment. It's a pretty fascinating movie, pretty incredible. And in it, part of what happens is this girl who goes into adolescence, and a lot of times when kids go into adolescence, there's a precipitous drop in happiness for a lot of different reasons. But it's kind of looking at how some of this happens. She creates these core memories. These core memories then get logged in these various worlds, and they create these worlds, and these worlds promote her well-being. So some of her core memories go into her sense of family, and as long as her sense of family is healthy, she has a sense of well-being. She plays hockey, and so when she is able to experience healthy achievement, that goes into her core memories, make her feel healthy about herself. And it creates these different worlds: family world, achievement world, honesty world. But one of the worlds is silly world. And I forget the exact name of it. Someone will have to tell me what it is. But it's just a world built on pure silliness. And it's when her parents are willing to be silly with her, and when she was silly back with them. And in that willing to be silly, it's showing how the person is willing to go off task and just enjoy being with the person that's with them. And there's actually a fair amount of research done on this. And the alternative that most of us employ is we employ sarcasm. Rather than be silly, we employ sarcasm. And sarcasm is scathing, and sarcasm is other people focused. When we're silly, it's self-deprecating. The focus is on other people, it's on us. And what we're doing is we're just saying, we don't have to be so serious. We don't always have to be on task. We can just enjoy the moments. We can just have a little fun. And it brings the whole stress level down, the whole anxiety level, the whole performance level down, and people can just be silly. They can just enjoy being with each other. And so silliness becomes an important part, particularly in early childhood and parenting when our kids are young. But I don't think it ever goes away. And maybe it changes a little bit as we get older, but I still think there's a place for just not being so serious, just enjoying being with each other, going off task, and making the most of the time. The second thing that we see Jesus do is that we see that he is willing to be unproductive, relatively speaking. And again, we live in a day and age that puts huge emphasis on productivity. And the way we see this unproductiveness brought out in the text, and it's done very deliberately, is both these stories create a contrast. And they create the contrast between the huge crowds that are around Jesus and the great many needs of all these people who are pushing in, wanting something from him. And then there's these two little individuals. And the word that's applied to both of them is little. If you want to do a fascinating study, look at these two stories and look at all the similarities between them. And so both of them are described as little, a little daughter and a little child. And the thing to remember is in the Bible, little doesn't mean unimportant. So, for instance, when the voice of God is described, it said there's this great big earthquake, and God's voice wasn't in this great big earthquake, and this huge wind makes a whole lot of noise, and God's voice wasn't in this great big wind. But in this still small moment, it's in this still small moment, this little moment that the voice of God speaks. So it's in the little things that God speaks. Little is not unimportant. But there's this contrast by the many, the huge, the great needs, and these little people. And Jesus chooses to attend to these little people. And in a sense, he chooses to be unproductive. What would have been productive? To attend to all these people with all their needs and, make the biggest difference possible. But instead, he chooses to use his time unproductively and tend to little people. But of course, we've talked about before, in relationships, it's the little things that make big differences. One of the ways that I've seen this happen is when parents have date nights with their kids or have special days with their kids. Just recently, for instance, Matt often attends this service and often does the video for us, though we're thankful that Jim is doing that today, so Matt can have a day off. And recently, Matt put up a picture of himself with his son Jack on a date night together. And I thought it was really cool, that a dad described an outing with his son as a date. I thought that was kind of a really cool thing. But what's the whole purpose of a date? A date isn't to be productive. The whole purpose of a date is to just spend time with somebody, right? You toss productivity. You don't have a list to check off to be. It's just about spending time with the person. So when Matt goes on a date night with his son, what's he doing? He's just spending time with him, and his son knows that, and that'll go a long way. And so this idea of having date nights with our children, with our spouses, friends know this. This is why friends go out together. What do friends do? Friends go out together. Why? Because friendship isn't about being productive. It's just about enjoying the people who are your friends. That's why you're together. And so we live in this culture that wants us to be productive, puts so much pressure on our kids to be productive. And sometimes we just need to chuck productivity out of the window, because productivity is actually the enemy of healthy relationships. And what we need to do instead is just enjoy being together and just focus on the people in front of us. The third thing that Jesus does, and this is particularly fascinating to me, is that he goes off clock. And so in the business world, in the professional world, the idea is we maximize the time when we're on the clock. On the clock, those are billable hours. So they're the focus. That's where the money is made. So the things you do on the clock, those are things that matter. So on the clock is really where the emphasis goes. But Jesus in today's gospel is off the clock, so to speak. He's not preaching or teaching. He hasn't formally gathered people around and engaging in healing. He's not formally doing that. He's not at the synagogue. No, he's just going from one place to another. This is downtime for Jesus. He's taking a walk. So he's off the clock. But the interesting thing is, it's the things that we do off the clock that really speak the loudest about what we believe, that really speak the loudest about what matters to us. And the question it sort of raises, and the question that I literally hope you'll think about and talk about, is the question is, what do I do beyond my job description that evidences what I really believe? Beyond my job description, what do I do that really speaks of what's most important to me? And it might be our job description in our job, but it might be our job description as a parent. And not that there's a formal job description, but there's a set of expectations. Might be our job description as a spouse. Not that there's a formal job description, but there's a set of expectations. It might be our job description as a friend. Not that there's a formal job description, but there's a set of expectations. And so what do I do that goes beyond simply what's expected of me to go off the clock to speak about what's really important? And we have a language for that here at St. Matthew's. The language we use is the words, and then some. We don't just want to do what's the basics. We don't want to just meet expectations. We want to go beyond expectations. We want to go the extra mile. We want to go above and beyond. We want to surprise and delight. And one of the people who I think does this really well is, well, your dad, Pat Pritchett. And Pat has coached our softball team. I suggested the last service that maybe it's been 6 or 7 years, but Pat told me he's actually been doing it for 10 years. Where the heck does the time go? I can't even believe it. And that's an amazing thing and a beautiful thing. And when Pat is coaching softball, he's off the clock. And you may not know this about Pat, but Pat loves sports. Sports are important to Pat. And so when he went on the softball field, he could be a very competitive person. And on occasions, every now and then, we get little glimpses of that. But for the most part, when Pat is off the clock and he's working with the softball team, as he's done for 10 years, he's just living out his values. And what he's doing is he's building a community of people who can simply get to know each other and enjoy being together. Doesn't matter whether we win or lose. Doesn't matter whether we play a great game or not. The important thing is that people are getting to know each other. People are having fun together. People are building a little community. And it's always been a very successful way, by the way, that we've been able to incorporate newcomers, maybe the most successful way that we've been able to incorporate newcomers to church. Every year, people are new to the church playing the softball team, and it's a way they can get to know folks and get involved with folks. And so, to me, this just speaks the world of the kind of person that Pat is, what Pat really values, what really matters to him, because it's what he does off the clock that speaks of how much he values community, how much he values being together. And so, again, in the same way, what are we doing beyond our job description, beyond what's expected of us, beyond those sort of on-the-clock hours as a parent, as a spouse, as a worker, that show what we really believe, what's really important, what really matters to us. And I think if you think about this, you will realize what I realize is the people who we respect the most, the people who we really seek to emulate, the people that I really want to be with and model my life after, aren't the people who do great jobs on the job. They might do a great job on the job, but it's the people who consistently go above and beyond when they're off the job. People who do a great job and then some. People who, when they are off the clock, are living what they really believe. Well, the other day, and with this I close, I was with a young man who comes to the 11 o'clock service. His name is J.P. Luke, and J.P. is a sharp young guy. He was a Navy pilot, and now he's very successful in his career. Last year, they adopted a couple kids, a couple young boys who are just cute as cute can be. And J.P. said, I could really use a little time away, and I happen to know that J.P. likes to go fishing. So I said, J.P., come on, let's go hit the water. So we hit the water for a little while. And his wife was very gracious in taking care of the kids, which she said she does anyhow. But in the course of things, JP and I were talking about life and having a good conversation. And somehow we got talking about parenting advice. And he said, the most helpful parenting advice that anybody ever gave me. And remember, Navy pilot, so disciplined, task-oriented, on task, productive, on the clock, doing well, has his to-do list, very goal-oriented. He said, the single most helpful thing people told me is that parenting is inefficient. He said, parenting isn't about productivity. As a parent, you're going to have to throw your to-do list out the window. If you start today and you make your to-do list and say, today I'm just going to work this through, you're going to be frustrated every day of your life. And he said, that was the single best advice anybody has given me. Because now, when my to-do list goes out the window and I'm tempted to get frustrated, I just enjoy being with my kids instead. And that, I think, is really what all three of these things have in common. Relationships are gloriously inefficient. And while we may value efficiency out in the world out there, and we do, and it's important in the world out there, if we want to have healthy relationships, we too are going to have to be gloriously inefficient. Amen. Amen.